stop the video now. That was a part of a documentary called Conceptual Paradise by German artist Stefan Römer. He did interviews with most of the protagonists of conceptual art and some of the so-called neo-conceptual artists. When Nikolaus Schaffhausen asked me if I wanted to give a lecture on occasion of the Cornerstones series, he offered me two options, John Baldessari or Damien Hirst. Although I have nothing against Hirst, I must admit that the artistic practice of John Baldessari means a lot more to me. Thus I chose him, even though, in contrast to many of the other speakers of this lecture series, I do not know him personally. It is nigh impossible to present a complex work such as that of John Baldessari within the scope of one lecture. It follows then that recent exhibitions and publications have then been devoted to different, specific aspects of his oeuvre. A comprehensive exhibition in Bonn last year, for example, focused upon the theme of music in Baldessari's art. His relationship to ironic commentary has also been repeatedly researched in a number of publications, and his influence as a teacher has also been frequently emphasized. Indeed, it seems that a particular important aspect of the artist's practice is his role as a teacher of art. Baldessari is, however, a figure of paradox. One may reasonably argue that he is by now one of the most influential figures in art education, but only while acknowledging that he questions his very premise and thereby reinvents it. As he observes in Teaching Art, a compendium of essays and interviews published last year by the Städelschule in Frankfurt, quote, "I don't think art can be taught. I really don't. But I do think that one of the advantages of an art school is that the students get to meet artists. The value of that is that they see that artists are humans. Art isn't something esoteric that's in books and magazines and museums. It's done by real people." End of quote. A dry lecture about an artist might not be the best way to get to know his work, but I'm sorry, it's the only thing I can offer at the moment. John Baldessari is maybe best known for his use of imagery and language appropriated from popular culture. Magazine photographs, newspaper articles, television and Hollywood movie stills. His repositioning, recontextualization and juxtaposition of different components into a unit of opposites makes him an iconoclastic artist in the best sense of the word. Born in 1931, he began to experiment with various styles of art in the 1960s. His play with random scraps of billboard posters, for example, dates from this period. In the late 1960s, he moved toward an emphasis on concept over execution. Later, the intellectual analysis of social codes and emotional content became a main topic in Baldessari's art. No, that's not the image I want. Hey. Sorry. Oh, yeah. His work is distinguished not only by an enormous potential based on a combination of elements of completely diverse origin and character, but also by conducting a dialogue which, in terms of both form and content, seems open-ended. Baldessari describes his approach as following. It's like when I'm in an aeroplane cabin and overhear two conversations. One says something and another says something else. I could not have thought up those phrases on my own and respond to it by connecting one to the other, taking both out of their own context and making them part of my imagination. Baldessari's art operates on many levels of symbolic and literal meaning, evoking for the viewer fragments of stories or triggering free associations. Imbued with the tension generated by the juxtaposition of opposites or dualisms, his works are at the same time marked by careful compositions and an ironic wit. Baldessari is now best known for his works where he covers certain parts of the image which stress the linguistic element or which give rise to an additional, definable linguistic meaning. the unrecognizable face of a person, for example. You've seen this fisherman. That was the image I wanted to show right now. Many of Baldessari's works are based on a basic principle that activates the pictorial imagination of the viewer at a linguistic level. Around 1970, it was exactly this limited focus on the medium of text that established Baldessari's adherence to conceptual art, an impression that is reinforced by the fact that he took part in many of the important exhibitions on conceptual art. What speaks against this is the ongoing evolution of his work up to the mid-1970s, even during the main phase of the art movement he assumedly belonged to. For this reason, it might be better to focus on the fact that Baldessari set up a relationship or even a crossover between different medial forms and genres within one work, because it is precisely this that distinguishes him from the purely linguistic forms of conceptual art, as for example in the works by Art and Language. The crossover of different media made it possible for him to continue to link a self-referential thematization of the aesthetical with features of the everyday, the popular, and sometimes even the banal. Especially the idea of not taking any rules for granted, of relocating them in life, making them more concrete in order to show their manipulability, of rearranging the various elements in new combinations, is more than symptomatic for Baldessari's entire oeuvre. Still, it is interesting to go back to the origins of conceptual art and discuss Baldessari's work from this point of view. Rosalind Krauss is of the view that conceptual art is dead, and in any case was a style limited to a specific period. Be that as it may, there's hardly a movement or genre in art that has had such a strong resonance in recent years. Proof of this resides in contemporary artistic production, which can often be understood as a form of direct reference to or a development of existing conceptual approaches. Further evidence can be found in this sheer profusion of current publications dealing with conceptual art in its seminal form, which had its heyday between 1967 and 1977. From the vantage point of today, Catherine David's Documenta 10 was certainly groundbreaking in its presentation of conceptual art as the backbone and basis for the more recent artistic endeavor. After the euphoria surrounding context art from the early 90s, which followed up the element of institutional critique within conceptual art, it is scarcely possible to envisage an artwork that doesn't have a conceptual background. And yet, what do we mean by conceptual in this particular context? There's hardly any artist nowadays who doesn't refer to a concept of some description in his or her work. It is almost impossible to pursue art without emphasizing the inherent idea within or behind a work. It is almost as if everything created today, if not exactly conceptual art, does at least have a conceptual component. Is it at all possible to relinquish the self-reflexive standpoint in art engendered by conceptual art? And what relationships have come into being between current artistic practice and conceptual art as an historical category? If Joan Baldessari features on the following, it is not because I want to stylize him in some way as the founding father of conceptual art. On the contrary, Baldessari's work exemplifies how heterogeneous conceptual art was as a genre from the outset, and how difficult it is to trace its genealogy in terms of a unified category. Although it is